Welcome. I am Ms. Hufflinger. I'm a math teacher here if you guys haven't had me before. So again, these are the notes that we'll be working from today, and then we'll work on some practice problems from one of the ACT released tests. So the breakdown of the ACT, what shows up on the math ACT. Number and quantity problems, those are in the first 30. They're pretty straightforward. You like those. They're like your absolute value, which number is bigger type problems. In the last 30, they can be some of the most challenging problems on the test, because then they throw in some variables. They're like your number set problems. So we'll talk about those. Algebra problems show up, so solving equations, factoring, that type of stuff. Functions, that's domain, range, looking at graphs. Some geometry, so there could be a little bit of perimeter area, surface area, volume. There's a little bit of SOHCAHTOA, right triangle trig on the ACT, and then statistics and probability, some basic statistics and some basic probability. All right. So if you want a description of each of those more broken down, those are the next couple slides if you guys want to look at those. But and then the ACT scoring for the math, English, science, reading. This is just a breakdown of how they score based on how you did on each individual test. On the test that Mr. Reinhardt sent you, those are full practice tests. At the end of each of those is the answer keys to those tests. So we'll just be looking at the math practice test from the ACT number 6, but they have the reading, the English, and the science are also parts of those tests. So some things that you need to know for the ACT. So some formulas you might have forgotten about. A formula that could show up is the distance formula. There's 2 ways to do the distance formula. You can straight up memorize the distance formula. Okay, some of you guys just know the distance formula. That's awesome. The distance formula actually comes from the Pythagorean theorem. You all know the Pythagorean theorem. So if you forget the distance formula, it comes from the Pythagorean theorem. So the distance formula is the distance between 2 points is given by the square root of, you subtract the x's and you square it, plus you subtract the y's and you square it. That is the distance formula. It comes from the Pythagorean theorem. So if you're given 2 points on the ACT and it's asking you to find the distance between them or asking you to do something with the distance. So for instance, if we have the points 3, -2, and the point -4, 5, and it wants to know what is the distance between those 2 ordered pairs, you have 2 options on how you want to do it. If you have that distance formula memorized, you can just plug into the distance formula and go. If not, you can graph those 2 points. So 3 over 2 down would be the point 3, -2. 4 to the left and 5 up would be the point -4, 5. Is that okay? And then just as a reminder, this is quadrant 1, this is quadrant 2, this is quadrant 3, that's quadrant 4 when we're doing ordered pairs. And you have the y-axis and the x-axis. All right, so our objective with the distance formula is we want to know how far the first point is to the second point. Well, you can make a right triangle using that pink line as the hypotenuse. So I can go straight down from -4, 5, and then straight over to 3, -2, or I can go straight up from 3, -2 over to -4, 5. I'm going to go down and across. And now we have a right triangle. Well, a squared plus b squared equals c squared is the Pythagorean theorem. So we can call this A, B, and C. And then it's just a matter of counting. How high did the triangle go? How far over did the triangle go? Well, my triangle started at -4 and it went all the way over to +3. How long is that line if it started at -4 and it went all the way over to +3? -4 to +3. How long is that distance? 7. So this distance is 7. And then for my b, I started at -2 and it went all the way up to 5. So how far up did it go? So from -2 to +5, how far is that? 7. And so if you're going to use the Pythagorean theorem, 7 squared plus 7 squared equals c squared. And so this would be 49 plus 49 equals c squared. So c is going to be the square root of 98. And we'll talk about how to break that down in a second. That's using the Pythagorean theorem for the distance formula. So if you don't know that blue distance formula, it's okay. You can still draw the 2 points, connect them, and make it some right triangle out of it, and you can use the Pythagorean theorem. If we were going to use the actual distance formula, what you should do is label those points x1, y1, x2, y2. So we have x1, y1, x2, y2. Those of you guys who just walked in, Mr. Reinhardt emailed you guys these notes. They're called the ACT review. You can download them into Notability. And then ACT number 6, you should also download that into Notability. So now we have x1, y1, x2, y2. Just plug them in. And the distance formula says take x2 minus x1 plus take y2 minus y1. And then square root it. So if we take -4 minus 3, we get -7. So it's going to be -7 squared plus, if I take 5 minus -2, that becomes 5 plus 2. And again, I have 7 squared. -7 times -7 is 49. 7 times 7 is 49. So again, I get the square root of 49 plus 49, which is 98. Either way you do it, you get the same answer. Those are radicals. Do you guys remember what you can do to a radical to simplify it? Put it in its simplest form? Yeah. Square rooted. Yep. So you're looking for perfect squares that are factors of 98. So perfect squares are like 1 squared is 1, so 1's a perfect square. 2 squared is 4, so 4 is a perfect square. 9's a perfect square, 16, 25, 36. What's a perfect square that's a factor of 98? What goes into 98 that's a perfect square? Yeah, 49, Nathan. So this is going to be the square root of 49 times the square root of 2. So 98 is 49 times 2. I can take the square root of 49. What's the square root of 49? 7. So this is just going to be 7, and then square root 2, I can't take the square root of, so it stays underneath. So if I wanted to simplify that distance, it would be 7 square root 2. Do we have questions on the distance formula? So you can do it either way. You can do it with the formula, or sometimes we blank on formulas. So just remember, you can plot the 2 points, connect them with the line, and then make a right triangle out of it. Okay. The midpoint formula. That's if you want to find the middle of 2 points. The midpoint formula, again, it has a formula. If you forget it, it's okay. You can also brute force your way to the midpoint. So the midpoint formula says we want to find the middle of the x's. So you add up the 2 x's and you divide by 2, and that's going to give you the middle of the x's. To find the middle of the y's, you add the y's together and divide by 2, and that'll give you the middle of the y's. So again, let's say we had the points 3, -2, and then this time, let's say we have the points 5, 6. You can just use the midpoint formula, or you can use the idea of slopes as well to find the distance in between these 2 points. So what do I mean by that? So it's almost the same exact idea that we just did with the distance formula. So if I plotted them, 3 over, 2 down, that would be the point 3, -2. And then 5 over and 6 up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's the 0.56. I want to find the point that's directly in between them. Well, connect them. And you can make a right triangle out of them. Making that right triangle also helps you find slope, which we'll talk about later. Remember, slope is rise over run. So making the right triangle helps you find the slope of that line. So if I rise and then I run, I'm finding the slope. I started at a height of -2, and I went all the way up to a height of 6. So how many did I rise? If I went from -2 to +6, how much does that rise? 8. And then for my run, I started at 3 and I ran over to 5. How many did I run over? 2. That slope, midpoint, is going to be doing half of each slope. So I want to rise up halfway and run over halfway. And that would also allow me to find the midpoint. If I ran up halfway, how many would I run up? 4. And how many would I run over? 1. So if I go up 4 over 1, if I do half of the slope, I'd get to the midpoint. So up 4, I would be at 2, and then over 1, I'd be right here. So I should be at the point up 4 over 1. My midpoint should be the 0.24 if I brute force my way to it, just using the idea of slopes. Or we can use the formula. So add up the x's, divide by 2, add up the y's, divide by 2, and that's going to give us the midpoint as well. Yes. 4, 2, thank you. I love it when I get confused faces. So if we add up the x's, divide by 2, add up the y's, divide by 2, we should get the exact same thing. So let's label them: x1, y1, x2, y2. So it's going to be 3 plus 5 over 2, and -2 plus 6 over 2. And we get 8 over 2, which is 4, and 4 over 2, which is 2. So again, we would get 4, 2. So again, for distance and midpoint, there's formulas that you can just use. So if you're good at memorizing formulas, you're good to go. If you know that sometimes on tests you blank when it comes to formulas, just know you can brute force your way through either of those by plotting them and making right triangles. Questions? Okay. Percents. Percents show up on the test. You guys all have different ways that you guys think through percents, right? So we'll look at a couple problems on that practice test. But a percent is just a number out of what? 100. So if you had 87%, it's 87 over 100, right? So just remember, if you're given a percent, it's a number out of 100. So you can write it as a number out of 100. You can also write it as a decimal. What's 87% as a decimal? Yeah, 0.87. And I think most of you guys, when you're dealing with percents, you use the decimal way of doing it. So if you wanted to know 25%, 24, you do 0.25 times 24. I think that's how most of you guys do it at this point. But we'll look at some percent problems on the test. A percent problem that tends to trip you guys up more than others is when you have a markup or a markdown and they want to know the percent markup or the percent markdown. You tend to put things in the wrong places. If it's a percent markup or a percent markdown, you always put the original price in the denominator. So whatever the original price was or the original amount that you paid, that always goes in the denominator of those problems. The amount of money that it went up or down is the numerator. So let's say like movie tickets in 1998 were $4. And now what's a movie ticket cost? I know we haven't been to movies in forever, like 12 bucks or something, 10 bucks. Yeah, okay. So the original price of movie tickets was 4 bucks. The markup was about 8 bucks, right? So you would do 8 over 4 like that. So the original price goes on the bottom, and then the difference of the prices goes on top. So the difference of the original and the new price would go on top. So that's how you do a percent markup or markdown. And that's going to equal your percent out of 100. Or you divide them, you get a decimal. And that would be your percent markup, markdown. But those are I think typically on these, those are the only ones that would trick you guys up. They're not as straightforward as that ones. All right. Questions so far? Some common area formulas that will show up on the ACT. Your rectangles, your squares. So it's area of a square is just going to be side times side. I'm not going to put s squared because they look like 5, so I'm going to write it out side times side. If it's a rectangle, the area is going to be base times height or length times width. If it's a triangle, it's half of a rectangle, so the area formula is base times height divided by 2, or half base times height, however you guys like looking at it better. Sometimes you need the area formula for trapezoids. Sometimes you can like break it up into triangles and a rectangle, but sometimes you actually need that area formula. So if it's a trapezoid, you have base 1 and you have base 2. The bases are the parallel sides. So the two sides that are parallel are your bases. So if you have a trapezoid, the area formula for a trapezoid is you add up the two bases, you multiply by the height, and then you divide by 2. A parallelogram, it's like the pushed over rectangle. Its area formula is also base times height. And then a circle, the area formula for a circle is pi times the radius squared. If you are given a prism, a rectangular prism, the volume of a rectangular prism is length times width times height. So that's the volume of a rectangular prism. It's length times width times height. That's the most common volume that would show up. I think if anybody else showed up, they'd probably give you the volume, but if not, if it's a cylinder, the volume of a cylinder is the area of the base. The base is a circle, so pi r squared, and then times the height, so pi r squared h would be the volume for a cylinder. Probably pyramids won't show up because they have different bases. Let's do a cone. The volume of a cone is 1/3 pi r squared h. So it's a third of the cylinder formula. And then if you have a sphere, the volume of a sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. Questions on any of those? And again, I can share my finished version of these with you guys afterwards if you miss anything or if you want to see what I wrote. All right, so types of functions that will show up on the ACT. Linear functions. You know a function is going to be linear because when you graph it, it makes a line, right? So these are your y equals mx plus b type equations. M is your slope. B is your y-intercept. And so if we had something like y equals negative 2/3 x plus 4, they could expect you to know what this graph could look like. They could give you a whole bunch of graphs and say which one of these is the equation of this graph. They could say, hey, what's the slope of this graph? They could say, what's the y-intercept of this graph? But if we went to graph this, where would this graph start at? 4 on the y-axis, because the y-intercept's 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and you make a point. After you make that point for the y-intercept, what do you do? Yeah. Down 2/3. So you're going to move the slope. Since the slope's negative, we're going to move down. We're going to move down 2/3. So from that point, move down 2/3, and then you can connect them, and there's your line. So that's linear functions that have a slope and a y-intercept. Radical functions are your square root functions. So if you have something like y equals the square root of x, square root functions look like half of a sideways parabola. So they're parabolas that run left and right, and you only want half of it. So that is what the square root of x looks like. It's half of the sideways parabola. Piecewise functions, you don't need to know how to graph them, but you would need to know how to plug into them. So a piecewise function is a function that has 2 or more pieces. So you could have, it's 2x plus 3 when x is less than 0, and it could be x squared minus 4 when x is greater than or equal to 0. So that it's a function that comes in pieces. Again, you won't need to know how to graph these for the ACT, but what they could do is they could say, if that's your function, what would f at 3 be? So on a piecewise function, it has pieces, and it tells you what values of x go with each piece. So my top piece at 2x plus 3.
Group leaders, all your trash is placed in the black trash bags and put outside the door of your classroom. You have to stop all cleanup in 5 minutes. The final prayer session begins in 5 minutes, and this school is quiet. All trash put outside your door, rooms will pick it up in the black trash bags. In 5 minutes, we go quiet for the final prayer session.
So the top one, 2x plus 3, matches up with values when x is smaller than 0. And the bottom one, x squared minus 4, matches up when values of x are greater than or equal to 0. Well, we want to know what happens if I plug in 3 for x. So do I use the 2x plus 3 or the x squared minus 4 if x is 3? Yeah. Yep, I'm going to use the bottom one because this is my x value. So this is when x is equal to 3. And that's when x is greater than 0. So this is going to be 3 squared minus 4. I use that bottom equation, which would end up being 5. 9 minus 4 is 5. So that's the only thing you would really have to do with piecewise on the ACT if it shows up. Polynomial functions are your x squared, x cubes, x to the fourth, x to the fifth type functions. Things that you would need to know about polynomial functions, mainly quadratic. So if you had something like y equals x squared minus x minus 12, it's an x squared function. X squared functions make parabolas. So if it is a positive x squared function, it would make a happy looking parabola. If it's a negative x squared function, it'll make a sad looking parabola. So if the x squared term is positive, you'd have a happy parabola. If the x squared term is negative, you'd have a sad looking parabola. So looking at that function, x squared minus x minus 12, would I have a happy or a sad parabola? Happy. It's a positive x squared, so it'd be a happy parabola. You could also factor it to find the x-intercept. Do you guys remember how to factor x squared minus x minus 12? Yeah. Yep, so you've got to multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 1. So the numbers that multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 1 are negative 4 and negative 3. So this would be x minus 4, x plus 3 equals 0. And then what are the two terms that would make this 0? X equals 4 and x equals negative 3. So those would be my x-intercepts. So negative 3 and positive 4, and then it's a happy parabola. Exponential functions are when the variable is an exponent. Their graphs look like ramps. So they'll start low and then they shoot up high. They look like so another type of function that will definitely show up is the logarithmic function or log. You need to know how to deal with logs. So if we had something like 2 to the third is equal to 8, that is an exponential form. What's the base in that problem? What number is the base? 2, yep. What number is the exponent? 3. And then 8 is the product, because it's what you get when you multiply 2 times 2 times 2. The equivalent expression as a logarithm, you put the word log, and then the subscript number is the base. Well, what was the base in the original problem? 2. And then in logs, logs always equal the exponent. So logs are always equivalent to an exponent. What's the exponent in this problem? 3. And then the product goes next to the 2. So log base 2 of 8 is equal to 3. So you, for logarithms, what you want to be able to do is work between the two forms. So how this problem could have looked on the ACT is it could have just been, what is log base 2 of 8 equal to? Your calculator, yes, can do this for you. But on the ACT, you should be able to do these in your head if you know how to convert between the two forms. What's the base? 2. And remember, logs are always equal to an exponent. I don't know what the exponent is. And now it's going to equal the product. And you just have to fill in the blank. What exponent goes there to make it true? It would be 3. That's how you can deal with logarithmic type problems. Cool? So those are the different types of functions that can show up on the ACT. All right, linear equations we've already talked about briefly. Y equals mx plus b. You will need to know how to find slope. You will need to know how to find intercept, and you will need to know how to write the equation for a line. So, slope. What's the equation for slope? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Either whatever way you're going to pick it both ways. So the slope is the rise over the run. Rise is your y's, run are your x's. So it's going to be either y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, or you can do y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2. That'll be fine either way. That's how you can find slope if you're given 2 points. So for instance, if we're given the point -2, 5 and 4, -7, and it wants you to find the slope. If you forget the slope formula, you can do exactly like what we did with distance and midpoint. You can plot them and make a right triangle. Rise over run. So let's do this with the formula. X1, Y1, X2, Y2. So this slope is going to be Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. So -7 minus 5 over 4 minus -2. And then you just have to be careful with positives and negatives. -7 minus 5 is -12. -4 minus 2 is 6. If I reduce that, what's the slope going to be? -2. Is that okay? What if they actually wanted you to find the entire equation for that line? Well, now we've got to find the y-intercept. So what you can do is you can take the formula y equals mx plus b and plug into every variable except for b, because I don't know what b is. So I'm given 2 points up there, -2, 5 and 4, -7. I can pick either one. Do you want me to pick the -2, 5 or the 4, -7? -2, 5. All right, so let's pick him. And we're going to plug those in for the x and the y down here. So the x is going to become, or sorry, the y is going to become 5, and the x is going to become -2. What's the slope going to become? -2 as well, because that's what we just found for slope. And so now this equation is 5 equals -2 times -2 plus b. What's -2 times -2? 4. So 5 equals 4 plus b. So what's my b going to end up being? Subtract the 4, subtract the 4. And my y-intercept's 1. Now you have the slope and you have the y-intercept. You can write the equation for this line. It would be y equals mx plus b. So it'll be y equals -2x plus 1. And that would be the equation that would match up with those 2 original points. Questions on that? Another thing that it can ask you to do is just find intercepts. How do you find an x-intercept? Right, your intercepts are where the graph crosses the x-axis and the y-axis. I define an x-intercept. Yeah, you plug in 0 for y. So you're going to let y equal 0 and solve for x. How do you find a y-intercept? So how do you figure out where the graph is across the y-axis? Yep, let x equal 0 and solve for y. Questions on slope, intercepts, y equals mx plus b? Those are okay. Exponent rules. On exponent rules, when in doubt, you can just expand it out. You can write it out the long way if you forget the exponent rules. So you've got product rule. So if I have x to the second times x to the fifth, what's the rule that I can do if I'm multiplying two terms and they have the same base? You add the exponents. Good. Because x to the second means x times x. X to the fifth means x times x times x times x times x. Altogether, you would have 7 x's. So this is, you can add the exponents, and this would be x to the 7th. That's one of your exponent rules. As long as they have the same base, you can add the exponents. What if it was x to the 5th over x to the 8th? You can subtract the exponents. So this is the same thing as x to the 5th minus 8. And what's 5 minus 8? -3. So this is x to the -3rd. But if we went back to the beginning, when in doubt, expand it out. How many x's are up top? 5. How many x's are underneath? 8. If I cancel, how many x's would be left? 3. And would they be in the top or the bottom when I cancel? Awesome. So x to the -3 is the same thing as 1 over x to the 3rd. So if you have a negative exponent, it's the same thing as a positive exponent that we would get in the denominator. And then one more rule. Let's say we have 3x squared y to the 4th raised to the 4th power. What happens if you have an exponential expression raised to an exponent? What do you do with that exponent on the outside? Yep, you multiply it in, so you can distribute it in. It goes to everything, including the coefficient. So the 3 gets it, the x gets it, and the y gets it. Everybody gets that 4, and you're multiplying it. So this would be 3 to the 4th, x to the 2 times 4, and y to the 4 times 4. 3 to the 4th is 81, and then x to the 8th, y to the 16th. Questions? You guys remember talking about logarithms like 5 minutes ago? Yeah? What if I had that log base 3 of 81? What would that be equal to? See if you guys can remember what we did with logs earlier. And what would that be equal to? Log base 3 of 81. Yeah, there you go. The base is 3. We don't know the exponent, and it's going to equal 81. So 3 to what power is 81? Yep, 4, that's it. So that would be your answer on that problem. Questions on logs? Logarithms, when they show up on the ACT, they show up in questions 45 through 60. Typically, the most challenging problems on the ACT occur between 30 and 45. A lot of kids think 45 through 60 are challenging because they haven't gotten to that math yet. So some kids, when they take the ACT, have never met a log yet, or they've never met sine, cosine, or tangent yet. That's why those problems are harder. However, those problems actually on the test are not challenging log or sine or those types of problems. So it depends on whether or not you've been exposed to that math yet, whether or not they're hard. Questions 30 through 45 are more involved in challenging typically than the last 15. All right. Statistics. You just need to know basic statistics. What is the mean? If it asks you to find the mean, what is it asking you to find? Average. So you just add up all the numbers and divide by the total. So if our numbers were 3, 7, 5, 8, and 17, and it wanted you to find the mean of those numbers, all you got to do is add them together and divide by how many numbers there are. So you would take 3 plus 7 plus 5 plus 8 plus 17 and divide by 5. And you get 25, 35, 40, what is it, 8? So as long as you know what the words are, you're good to go on these statistics problems on the test. What's median? You guys remember what the median is? Yep, list them from biggest to smallest. So you go from smallest to biggest. And where's the median? To the middle. So the median is the middle number when you arrange them from the smallest number to the biggest number. What if there's 2 middle numbers? You average them. So if you find the middle number and there's 2 numbers in the middle, you find their average. So add them together, divide by 2. Find the middle of those 2 middle numbers. So to find the median, you arrange them from the smallest number to the biggest, and then the median is the number in the middle. And then what's the mode? Yeah. Yeah, it's the most repeated number. If no number is repeated more than any of the other numbers, there's no mode. So there can be no mode. But there's always an average and there's always a median. So the mode is the most repeated number. All right, are we okay on statistics? Probability. There's 2 things about probability that you need to be good to go on. One, if you remember the fundamental counting principle, it makes all of those problems where you guys do tree diagrams a whole lot easier. So like if you walk into a restaurant and they have 5 appetizers, 6 main meals, and 5 desserts, how many different ways could you order? A lot of you guys will just start making tree diagrams, right? It'll be like appetizer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then what if you pick? There's something called the fundamental counting principle. So if there are 5 appetizers, there are 6 main meals, and there are 7 desserts to choose from, how many different ways can you eat all of those? Or like order from their menu? If you can order 1 appetizer, 1 meal, and 1 dessert, you just multiply all 3 of them. That's the fundamental counting principle. So you literally can just take 5 times 6 times 7. So you don't have to make a tree diagram on those types of problems. Or if you like are trying to pick out an outfit in the morning, you have 10 shirts, 3 pairs of pants, and 6 pairs of shoes. You just multiply shirts times pants times shoes. And so this would be, you would have 210 different ways of ordering if that's what the menu was. That's one aspect of probability that can show up on the ACT. The other one is just normal probability, like you've got marbles in a bag, right? Probability is the outcome you want over the total number of outcomes. So if there's 20 marbles in the bag and 8 of them are red, and you want to get a red marble, you want red, you want 8 out of 10. That would be the probability of selecting a red. So probability in general is the outcome that you want to happen divided by the total number of outcomes. And those are the two big aspects of probability that you need to know how to do for the test, for the ACT. Questions on probability? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a good question. Yeah, if there is a problem on the test, you're like, this is going to take me longer than I want to think through. Skip it, circle it in the test booklet so you know that you skipped it, and then come back. And ACT, like at the end, make sure you're keeping track of time because you want to fill it all, right? It doesn't have to do with your loss. You want to fill it every level. All right. Geometry. SOHCAHTOA does show up on the test. SOHCAHTOA is sine, cosine, tangent in right triangle. The way that's the easiest way to remember is if you have a right triangle, and let's just call this triangle AB, well, we'll call this ABC. And let's say we know that this is 5 and this is 4. One thing that you do need to know how to do is the Pythagorean theorem, or to recognize your Pythagorean triples if you don't know the Pythagorean theorem. What's the Pythagorean theorem say? A squared plus B squared equals C squared, where C is the hypotenuse, right? So I'm missing side B. So we have 4 squared plus B squared equals 5 squared. What's the missing side going to end up being? The missing side is going to end up being 3. It's a 3, 4, 5 right triangle. So in order to do a SOHCAHTOA problem, you might need to find the missing side first. If they ask you, like, what is sine A or what is cosine B in this triangle? What I always tell my kids to do is circle whatever angle you want to work from. So we can work from angle A or angle B. Let's start by working from angle A. So whatever angle they're talking about in a SOHCAHTOA problem, if you're not comfortable with sine, cosine, and tangent, the first step that you're going to want to do is circle the angle that they want you to talk about. Then you label the sides based on that angle. What side is opposite angle A? What side is across from angle A? 4. So I'm going to label this side opposite. What side is the hypotenuse? 5. The longest side or across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. Then the other side is the adjacent side. It's the side that's not the opposite and not the hypotenuse. Now we've got the SOHCAHTOA as our mnemonic device. The sine of an angle is equal to the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. So sine opposite over hypotenuse, SOH. Cos is cosine. The cosine of an angle is equal to the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse. Cos, cosine, adjacent, hypotenuse. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Bless you. And then tangent is TOA. It's the opposite side over the adjacent side. So tangent, TOA, T-O-A. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So on the ACT, they could say, what's the sine of angle A? Well, sine is so opposite over hypotenuse. So once your triangle is labeled, what's the opposite over the hypotenuse in that triangle? What's the fraction? What over what? 4 over 5. Opposite over hypotenuse. That's it. So on a SOHCAHTOA problem, whatever angle they're talking about, circle it, label your side, and then answer the question based off of your labels. Questions on SOHCAHTOA? The two special right triangles can also show up. It's helpful to know how their sides work. In a 30, 60, 90 degree triangle, so 30, 60, 90 degree triangle. The side across from the 30 degree angle is the shortest side, and we can just call that X. The side across from the 90 degree angle, the hypotenuse is the longest side, and that ends up being 2x. And then across from the 60, that's the longer leg, that ends up being x square root 3. And then in your 45, 45, 90 degree triangle, that's your isosceles right triangle. If those two angles are the same, then the sides across from them are the same. It's isosceles. And then the hypotenuse is x times square root 2. So if the two sides were 3 and 3, then the hypotenuse would be 3 square root 2. Or if they were 8 and 8, then the hypotenuse would be 8 square root 2. Questions on the right triangle stuff that could show up? Some other shapes that are common are your circles and polygons. The formulas that you should be aware of for circles is the circumference of a circle is 2 pi r, and circumference is like the perimeter of a circle. So all the way around the circle is 2 pi r. And then the area of a circle is pi r squared. And then remember, in a circle, the radius goes from the center to the outside, and the diameter goes all the way through the center and goes from side to side. Polygons start with triangles. What do the 3 angles add up to in a triangle? 180. That's the triangle sum theorem. So if you add up the 3 angles in a triangle, you get 180. For every side that you add, so if you go up to 4 sides, you add a 180. If you go up to 5 sides, add another 180. 6 sides, add another 180. Why? Because you're making more triangles. So if you had a 4-sided shape, how many triangles can I make on the inside of that? Well, start at a corner. How many triangles do you have? 2. So this is 180, this is 180. So the 4 angles would add up to 180 plus 180, which would be 360. If you had a pentagon, so 5 sides, how many triangles could you make? Well, start at a corner and just start making triangles. So 1, 2, 3. So you have 180, 180, 180. So if you take 180 plus 180 plus 180, you get 540. So the 5 angles in a pentagon would add up to 540. There is a formula that lets you solve this. So like if it was 12 sides, instead of having to make all the triangles, you take the number of sides, subtract 2, and add 180, or it's multiplied by 180. So it's 180 times the number of sides minus 2. And that's how many, the sum of the angles inside the shape. If you wanted to use the formula instead of making the triangles. All right. Questions on any of those notes before we start working on through a practice? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Then go ahead and in your files that Mr. Reinhardt sent, you guys have an ACT number 6. Get that downloaded into Notability. So ACT number 6, and then scroll down to the mathematics test. So ACT number 6, scroll down to the mathematics test. And let's have you guys work on the first 7 problems. So I'll give you guys about 7 or 8 minutes. You guys can do all the first 7 problems. So it's ACT number 6. Scroll to the math test and see what you guys can do with those first 7 problems. Yep, first 7. You guys can talk.
Now, winners, head down to the higher 7 with all your students. Head down now. Final press session is over.
All right, gentlemen, let's talk about these first 7. Yep. All right. So on number one, the key word is they say proportionally. Whenever you're given a proportional problem, you got to think about what two things are they relating, and you make a fraction out of it. Proportion is just two fractions that are equal. So they're relating eggs and servings in this problem. So what I would do is I would say eggs over servings has to equal eggs over serving. Since they're proportional, you get to set up a proportion. So a fraction equal to a fraction. The relationship that they gave you was 3 eggs makes 6 servings. So 3 over 6 is going to equal 5 eggs makes how many servings? So 5 over x. And in a proportion, you can just cross multiply. So 3 times x equals 5 times 6. 5 times 6 is 30. So 3x equals 30. What is x going to be? 10. This one was a little bit more straightforward because a lot of you guys probably saw the relationship. If 3 eggs made 6 servings, the number of servings is just double the amount of eggs. So some of you guys probably just jumped straight through to 10. But on any proportion, if it says proportional, then it's relating 2 things. And you just make fractions. So if it's relating like width and length, you can do width over length equals width over length and set up the proportion and solve. All right. Questions on what? Okay. Number 2, the 35-member history club is meeting to choose a student government representative. The members decide that the representative who will be chosen at random cannot be the 3 officers of the club. What is the probability that Hiroko, who is a member of the club, but not an officer, will be chosen? Well, how many members are in the club? 35. How many are not officers? 32. Hiroko is 1 out of 32 of those people. So the probability that Hiroko is chosen, Hiroko is just 1. So we want Hiroko, that's 1, out of the 32 people that could be chosen. So the probability that Hiroko is chosen is 1 out of 32 because you have to subtract the 3 officers from the total number. Okay, questions on that one? All right, number 3 looks like it's going to be super hard, but it's actually not that bad. What value of x makes this true? Well, what's the base on both sides? It's the same. If the bases are the same, it's both 2 to a power and 2 to the power. The only way for this to be true is if the 2 exponents are equal to each other. So we need 2x plus 7 to equal 15. I need the exponent on the left to equal the exponent on the right for this to be true. And now how do I solve that? What's the first step to solve this equation? Subtract the 7, and 2x equals 8, and then what do I do? Divide by 2, and x would be 4. If you had time and you're like, I don't know how to do this, you can take each one of those answer choices and plug them in one at a time until you get it to work, correct? Right? It's a multiple choice test. So on an equation, you can do that. Questions on 3? All right. Number 4, f at 3 just means plug 3 in for all of the x's. So f at 3 means x is equal to 3, so we're going to plug 3 in for x. So it'll be 5 times 3 squared minus 7 times 4 times 3 plus 3. Order of operations says we have to do exponents first. So what is 3 squared? 9. And what's 5 times 9? 45. So this is going to be 5 times 9, which is 45. And then minus order of operations says we've got to do parentheses first over here. What's 4 times 3? And what's 12 plus 3? 15. So this is going to be minus 7 times 15. I got to multiply. What's 7 times 15? What is it? 105? 105. So now I've got 45 minus 105. What's 45 minus 105? Negative 60. Good. Questions on 4? Okay. Number 5, a wallet containing $5 or five $5 bills, 7 $10 bills, and 8 $20 bills is found and returned to its owner. The wallet's owner will reward the finder with a $1 or 1 bill drawn randomly. What is the probability that it's a $20 bill? Well, what we want is a $20 bill. How many $20 bills are there? 8 over the total number of bills. How many total bills are there? 20. So it's 8 out of 20 or reduced. What is 8 out of 20 reduced to? 2/5. Questions on that one? Okay. The ABC Book Club charges a $40 monthly fat fee plus $2 per book read that month. The Easy Book Club charges a $35 monthly fee plus $3 per book read in that month. Okay, gentlemen. How many books must be read in 1 month for the total charges from each club to be equal? Okay, well, the ABC Book Club charges $40 plus $2 per book. I don't know how many books they're going to read, so we'll call that X. I want that to be equal to the Easy Book Club, which charges $35 per month plus $3 per book. I want those two to be equal. X is the number of books that they're reading. Again, you can plug in one at a time until you got the two be equal, or you can solve it. On this, I have X's on both sides and by equal sign. I've got to move one of the X's. How do I move a 2X to the other side? Subtract it, good. So subtract the 2X, and I've got 40 equals 35 plus 1X. And then what's the next step to solve? Subtract the 35. So how many books do they have to read for it to be the same? 5 books. Questions on number 6? Seven. What type of shape is this? Parallelogram. What do you know about opposite angles in a parallelogram? All 3 angles in a triangle add up to 180. What about opposite angles? What do you know about that angle and that top angle in a parallelogram? They're the same. Opposite angles in a parallelogram are the same. So if that angle's 40, then this angle up here is also 40. It's a parallelogram. Now we have a triangle. What did I tell you about the 3 angles in a triangle? They equal 180. So those 3 angles, the 57 plus the 40 plus my unknown angle, which we'll call X, equals 180. So what's 57 plus 40? 97. So 97 plus X equals 180. What's X have to be then? 83. Is that okay? Yes. Yeah, if it was a straight line, it would. You can also say if that's 57 is bang on, here's 57. Like those are parallel lines up by a circle. And then you can find that angle and then those two. There's a couple ways to do it. But. All right, questions on 1 through 7? Yeah. BCA. No, so BCA plus 57 would have to equal these two, because those are opposite angles. Oh, I know what you're saying. Well, it would have to equal 40 plus that angle right there. Has to equal 180 because they're like inside interior angles. You want to think about it that way. There's a couple ways that you could have figured this problem out, but I think the easiest way is to recognize that the opposite angles are the same, and that makes it triangle. All right, let's go to the next page. Do you guys try 8 through 16? Go. Gentlemen, make sure your masks are over your noses. Yeah, make sure your masks are over your nose. And you can stay there. All right, gentlemen, eyes up front. Let's go through these. When x is a half, what is the value of 8x minus 3 divided by x? So we're just going to plug in a half. So 8 times a half minus 3 divided by a half. Order of operations says multiply first. So this 8 times a half would be 3. So I have 4 minus 3 divided by 1/2. In order of operations, if you have a fraction, you have to simplify the numerator and simplify the denominator. 4 minus 3 would be 1. So it's going to be 1 divided by a half. You can do 1 divided by 0.5 on your calculator. Or if you divide by a fraction, you're multiplying by its reciprocal. So 1 divided by a half is the same thing as 1 times the reciprocal, which just ends up being 2. Questions on that guy? Okay. 9, in the standard XY coordinate plane, what is the midpoint of 3, 8, and 1, -4? Again, you could plot them and find half of the slope, or midpoint is add the x's divided by 2, add the y's divided by 2. So this would be 2, 2. Using the midpoint formula, it would just be 2, 2. Questions on 9? All right, 10. The fluctuation of water depth at a pier is shown in the figure below. One of the following value gives the positive difference between the greatest depth and the least depth. Well, the greatest depth is here or here. What's the greatest depth? 12. What's the least depth? 6. What's the difference between the greatest and the least depth? 6. Number 11, the slope is what? Well, we have our slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, or you could plot the points and count. So this is going to be -5 minus 1 over 2 minus -2, which is -6 over 4, which would reduce to -3/2. Questions on 10 or 11? In Cherokee County, the fine for speeding is $17 for each mile per hour the driver is traveling over the posted speed limit. Kirk was charged a $221 speeding ticket. So 17 times X, the number of miles that he was going over the speed limit, is equal to 221. Divide both sides by 221, and X is going to be 13. Is that what it ends up being? So he was going 13 miles per hour over the posted speed limit. What was the posted speed limit? 30. So how fast was he going? 43. Is that okay for number 12? 13 says, what is the sum of the solutions to these two equations? So we've got to solve these two equations. How do I solve 8x equals 12? Divide, good. So divide by 8, divide by 8. And x is going to equal 3/2, which is 1.5. And then we've got to solve 2y plus 10 equals 22. So subtract the 10, subtract the 10. 2y equals 12, divide by 2, and y is 6. What's the sum of those two equations? 7.5. Questions on 13? The average of 5 distinct scores, meaning all the scores were different, has the same value as the median of the 5 scores. The sum of the 5 scores is 420. What is the sum of the 4 scores that are not the median. How do we figure this guy out? Well, if I add up the 5 scores that are not the median, I get 420. So if I take score 1 plus score 2 plus score 3 plus score 4 plus score 5, but without the median, so without that middle one, I get 420. If I add the median, then I get the sum of the 5 scores. So 420 plus the median is the sum of the 5 scores. To get the average, we divide by 5. The average has the same value. So if I divide by 5, the average is the same as the median, correct? That's how I would find the average. You guys agree with that? The average is the same as the median. So what is that going to be equal to? Did you guys do this a different way? You're looking at me weird. The average is the same as the median. So the average is add up all the scores divided by 5, correct? 420 is the 4 scores. X is the median. So 420 plus X divided by 5 is my average. That's going to equal the average, but it's also the median score. I'm going to multiply both sides by 5. And I get 420 plus X equals 5X. Subtract the X from both sides. So 420 equals 4X. So what's X going to be? Did I do this wrong? Yeah. Oh, the sum of the 5 scores is 420. There we go. Thank you. I made it harder than it was. The sum of the 5 scores is 420. What is the sum of the 4 scores that are not the median? I got you. There we go. So 420 divided by 5 is what? 84. Okay. So 84 is the average, but it's also the median. It wants the sum of the 4 scores that are not the median. So 420 minus 84 would give you that sum. So what's 420 minus 84? 336. Don't be like me. Read the problems carefully. All right. 15 is a straight up absolute value problem, but you have to work within your grouping symbols. So work within the innermost grouping symbols first. -8 plus 4 is -4. The absolute value of -4 is 4. Then minus 3 minus -9 is -6. The absolute value of -6 is 6. 4 minus 6 is -2. The absolute value of -2 is 2. Questions on 15? Which of the following expressions is the same as x to the 2/3 power? When you have a fraction exponent, the top number is your power, the bottom number is your root, if you want to think about it like that. So the top number you can think of as a normal exponent, the bottom one you can think of as a root. So we want a third root or a cube root, and we want an x squared. So we need a cube root and an x squared. So which one has a cube root and an x squared? You know what I mean by cube root? Cube roots, like roots look like that. So that's a cube root, that's a 4th root, that's a 5th root. We want a cube root and an x squared. Which one has a cube root and an x squared? Okay. All right. Questions on fraction exponents? All right. Questions on any on this page? Okay. Then go ahead and try 17 through 27.
Can you go to 13 again real quick?
Yeah, so you're just gonna solve each equation. So like, it looks like it's gonna be a system, but it's not, because there's not x's and y's in both of them.
Yeah.
So you're just gonna solve 8x equals 12. So divide both sides by 8.
Uh-huh.
And if on your calculator, when you do that, you'll get 1.5.
Uh-huh.
Then on the next one, to solve 2y plus 10 equals 22, subtract the 10 from both sides.
Yeah.
And you get 2y equals 12, and
And then
divide
you
by
just
2.
add those together?
And you add the two solutions together. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was
Oh, yeah. All right, gentlemen, eyes up front. Let's start talking about these guys. So in the standard XY coordinate plane, what is the slope of the line given by 4x equals 7y plus 5? Well, to do slope, we need it in y equals mx plus b form. So we need the y by itself. What do I need to do to get that y by itself? Yep, we can subtract the 5, and we have 4x minus 5 equals 7y. And then how do I get the y by itself? Divide by 7. So we have 4 over 7x minus 5 over 7 equals y. Which part of that is the slope? 4 over 7. So my slope is 4 over 7. Questions on 17? 18 is one of those number sense problems where I told you that sometimes they can be very straightforward, like the actual value problem on the previous page, or you kind of have to take through them. So when you always get an odd integer, an even plus an even, an odd plus an odd plus an even. Well, think it through in your head. 3 plus 3 is 2 odd. If I add 3 plus 3, I get 6. That's even. 6 and 6 are both even. If I add them together, I get 12. That's even. 3 and 6 are an odd and an even. If I add them together, I get 9, which is odd. So the way to get an odd integer is to add an even and an odd. So it would be 10. On a problem like that, you just go through the different scenarios, pick actual numbers, and go through the scenarios. Questions on 18? 19, the length of 2 legs of a right triangle are given in inches. The middle of AB is how many inches from A? So I want to know the distance of the midpoint of AB to A. Well, I need to know how long AB is. The easiest way to do it is the Pythagorean theorem. So 24 squared plus 32 squared equals AB squared. And when you go and solve this, you get AB equals 40, correct? That was the length of the hypotenuse when you guys did the Pythagorean theorem. Well, if the length of the hypotenuse is 40, the midpoint divides that in half, correct? So each piece would be 20. So the midpoint is going to be 20 inches away from point A. That would be the quickest way to do that problem without having to use the distance formula. Questions on that? Okay. 20, in triangle DEF, length from D to E is square root 30 inches. So let's call this DEF. DE is square root 30 inches. EF is 3 inches. How long is it from D to F? Well, did they tell us what type of triangle it was? No. If I only know 2 sides and I don't know what type of triangle it is, I can't find that third side. There's not enough information. So my answer is K. There's not enough information given. If it was a right triangle, I could do it. But they didn't tell me enough information to figure out that third side. Yeah. It would only be a right if they gave you a picture of it and it was a right triangle, or if they specified if a right triangle is right. I would have to tell you. All right, 21. Laura plans to paint the 8-foot-high rectangular wall in her room. And before she buys paint, she needs to know the area of the wall surface to be painted. 2 walls are 10 feet wide. So she has an 8 by a 10 and an 8 by a 10. And the other 2 walls are 15 feet wide. So she has an 8 by a 15 and an 8 by a 15. Those are her walls in her room. Are those okay? The combined area of the 1 window and the 1 door in her room is 60 square feet. She is not painting the window or the door. So once we find the total area, I'm going to have to subtract 50. Does that make sense? All right, so we've got 80, 80, And then, what are these, 120? 120, 120? So we've got 400 minus 60. And what's 400 minus 60? 340. So the total area that she is going to be painting is 340 square feet. Questions on that one? Okay. Next one. The length of a rectangle, we're going to draw a rectangle, is 5 inches longer than the width. I don't know the width, but I know the length is 5 inches longer than it. So it'll be W plus 5. The perimeter is 40. How do you find perimeter? Yeah, you add both sides. So 2 of the width, 2 of the length. So W plus W plus 5 plus W plus W plus 5 equals 40, the perimeter. Well, if you combine my terms, you've got 4W plus 10 equals 40. Divide that, or sorry, subtract 10, subtract 10. 4W equals 30. Divide by 4, divide by 4. And W is going to be 7.5. So the width is 7.5 inches. Questions on 22? 23 says 8% of 60 is 1/5 of what number? Well, let's find 8% of 60 first. To do 8% of 60, let's change 8% to a decimal. What's 8% of a decimal? 0.08. So we can take 0.08 times 60. What's 0.08 times 60? What is it? 4.8? Yeah. 4.8 is 1/5 of what number? So it's going to be 1/5 of x. So 1/5 times x. So how do I get rid of the 1/5? Multiply both sides by 5. So what's 4.8 times 5? 24? Yeah. There you go. Questions on 23? Armin is trying to decide whether to buy a season pass with college basketball team 20 home games this season. The cost of an individual ticket is 14 and the season pass is 175. How many games must he attend for the season pass to be a better deal? Okay, well, 14 times X, we want the season pass to be better, so we want that to be, we want the 175 to be a better deal. So we want the 14X to be better. We can do 70. Divide by 14, divide by 14. What's 175 divided by 14? 4.5. So if he attends 12.5 games, which is not possible, they'd be the same price. He wants the season pass to be better. So how many games would he have to attend? 13 games. Questions on 24. 25 is a scientific notation problem, but basically it's just a do you know your exponent operation. You get to do this in pieces. What's 4.8 divided by 1.6? 3. So I know it's not going to fire this guy. Now what's the rule on exponents? What can you do with the exponents when you're dividing? Subtract. So it's going to be -7 minus -11. What happens when I take -7 minus -11? You get 4. So times 10 to the 4th. So the answer is going to be A. Questions? Is a midpoint problem disguised. A circle has a center at -1, 2. So -1, 2. And a point on the circle at 2, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here's the center, here's point A. And I'm just going to draw a circle. Line AB is the diameter. Is that okay? It wants to know, sorry, what are the coordinates of point B? Well, however I move to get from point C to point A, I'm going to do those in reverse to get to point B. So to go from point C to point A, I went from -1, 2 to 2, 6. So how many did I rise and how many did I run? Well, I rose up 4 and I ran over 3. So to get to point B, I'm going to fall down 4 and run over 3 in the opposite direction. So if I fall down 4, I'm going to be at -2. And if I run over 3, I'm going to be at -4. So I'll be at -4, 2. Does that kind of make sense? That's the easiest way to do that problem, is visually without having to use visual formulas or anything like that. $27. I'm going to be really impressed if anybody of you guys remember how to factor a sum or a difference of 2 cubes. Anybody remember how to do it? Okay. 27. X cubed is a perfect cube. 64 is a perfect cube. A sum and a difference of 2 cubes. If you had A cubed plus B cubed, when you go to factor it, A cubed is made by A times A times A. B cubed is made by B times B times B. The first parentheses is going to be A and B. To make the second parentheses, you square the first one, so it would be A squared. Then you multiply them together, you get AB. And then you square the last guy, B squared. Since it was plus, my signs go plus, minus, plus. That's the sum and difference of 2 cubes. If it was A cubed minus B cubed, the signs would go minus, plus, plus, but you factor it the same way. In my example, is it plus or minus? Minus. So when I go to factor this, I get x to the fourth, and then I get x squared, 4x, and 16. And then my signs would go minus, plus, plus. It wants to know which one of those is a factor. It would be A. Question. All right. So gentlemen, that was about half the test. The answer key, my workout solutions are here as well. So those are colors what Mr. Reinhardt emailed you guys. If you have questions, you can come see me any morning on your room today. So if you want to contact us, or your math teachers can help you too. Yes.
Between now and April 17th, what's the best thing for them to do to prepare for the test?
So I sent you guys, or Mr. Reinhardt sent you 3 practice tests in that email. All 3 of those have worked out solutions that I worked out on a different PDF. Your best way to study for the ACT is just to do as many practice tests as you can. Time yourself, see how long it's taking you to do them. You got to get it done in an hour. So the more that you can do, the better it'll go. Okay?